Welcome back to another episode of NCBA's Coffee Break, where we dive into the conversations shaping policy, innovation, and the future of our legal practice areas, all over a cup of coffee. I'm your host, Nathan Willner, and today I'm thrilled to be joined by a very special guest, Ohio State Representative Michele Grimm. I had the pleasure of meeting Representative Grimm recently at an innovative summit in Denver, hosted by the National Conference of State Legislators and the Pew Charitable Trust. And it was really an inspiring gathering of change makers. So I'm excited to continue the conversation today. We'll be getting Rep. Grimm's impressions of the summit, what stood out to her, and where she sees opportunities for collaboration and progress moving forward. So grab your cup of coffee, settle in, and let's get to it. Welcome, Representative Grimm.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. I have a Diet Pepsi already, so that's where I am
Yeah,
in the process.
you know, Diet Pepsi is the new coffee, I guess, in some ways. Um, so, tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, how you got in the state legislature, and you know, the makeup of your district, and what's going on in Ohio.
Sure. Michele Grimm, I represent the 43rd House District in Ohio, which is parts of Toledo, a village and a township. So that's Ottawa Hills and Washington Township. So for those not familiar with Toledo, so we are just on the Michigan and Ohio border. So we're by Lake Erie. And so my area ha is kind of like west and north, I would say. So I do have that portion of the Michigan border, and then I also have the University of Toledo. My district is a pretty diverse district. And how I got to the legislature, so this is my second term, and how I got to the legislature is before this, I was on Toledo City Council for a year. I decided to run for the state house and won. So this is my second term. Plan on going into my third term, running for my third term next year. And I went to the debt convening at NCSL because I'm working on a lot of things around medical debt reforms. So it was really up my alley, and I wanted to kind of dive in and learn more about other forms of debt protections around consumer debt, and especially medical debt.
Yeah, so medical debt is definitely a hot topic, and glad that we had the curiosity to learn more and see what's going on in the industry itself. So let's just get to it. What would you say the most impactful insights you gained from the summit regarding the relationship between creditors and consumers, especially in the context of defaulted debt?
Yeah, no, I would say that, I thought a lot of the conversations that were interesting around like just making sure that I think communication is key, right? Communication with like what debts are being collected on, what exactly are they paying, and just being having that open line of communication throughout the entire process. Because what I got out of it, especially with consumer debt, and to also the same extent medical debt, is that a lot of consumers are like, I don't remember this, so I'm not going to pay it. And when they're like, oh yeah, it's this, then having that dialogue and having more of a um an open line of communication and just saying, hey, this is what this is, I think people are more open to being like, okay, yes, I will, work with this person to come up with a payment plan. Because I think it's still true with consumer debt as it is with medical debt. Is like I think people do want to pay their bills. People want to pay it off. I think most people just get behind and just can't keep up. They spend a little bit beyond their means, and then once they get behind, they don't really know what to do. And so when that happens with getting something in the mail saying, oh, I owe this money, it's going to go to collections, or we're going to go to court now, they kind of shut down. And I think keeping that line of communication open with the creditor and the consumer is really impactful in those situations.
Yeah, and I agree. It's people need the information to understand what the nature of the debt is, where it came from, and transparency really is, something that is baked into the process. But again, not everyone who gets notices understands the nature of the
Hmm.
notices, and so you bring up a really good point. And medical debt is a complicated situation in
Yeah.
general. We all see physicians, we all, and when we get our explanation of benefits and what portion is paid, and what, even lawyers, even legislators sometimes have a hard time figuring it out, don't we?
It's very complicated. And so even when you get that explanation of benefits, like something else will pop up and you're like, where did that come from? So, but yeah, I think just again, I think communication is really key, especially kind of with everything, but especially with these areas, because, that way people understand what's going on and then I think they're more likely to act and negotiate and come up with something that they can work out between the creditor and the consumer.
Yeah, no, you raise a good point. So as a policymaker and also as consumers ourselves, what do you think is a good way to promote greater empathy and civility in the debt collection process, to make sure that individuals in financial distress are treated with dignity and respect,
Hmm.
but at the same time, the businesses and the creditors are able to recoup the money that they lent or the services that they afforded the consumer. So how do we get that balance?
Yeah, no, again, I think like I said before, I think it's true with both consumer and medical debts that people do want to pay their bills. Um, Most people want to not they want to be free of debt. They don't want to be in debt. Debt can be embarrassing. It can be debilitating. Sometimes it happens where you spend more than your means. Because you have this line of credit and then it got out of hand and maybe you lost your job. So just I think on the creditor side with consumers is just understanding like sometimes people get over their head and to be more respectful of people. I've talked to people around the medical debt space and it's the same way. A lot of people, even in that space, they're like, well, people need to pay their bills. Yes, but you need to be compassionate and respectful because medical debt, for example, can get very high, especially also with consumer debt. So I think just being compassionate and knowing that the majority of people do want to pay their bills. They don't want to be in debt. They maybe just got out of hand. The interest rates are really high, something like that. And, again, with the consumers on the creditor side, asking those questions. Hey, what is this debt for? I don't understand this. I don't remember this bill, and just getting that information, and then both of them working together to figure that out, and then coming up with ways to work out something so there is a payment plan or something like that. So I think that would just make things a lot better between the creditor and the consumer.
Yeah, and I think part of the conversation that we had was that, and this may have been surprising to some folks in the room, is that most people that do debt collection on the creditor side, even from the legal perspective, would much rather have voluntary payments set up between the
Hmm.
parties than having to use any, you know, involuntary court means or, attach wages or anything like that, because ultimately, if someone can't, make the payment, it just doesn't work. So
Right.
something that is voluntary and something that is, is manageable by the consumer and acceptable to the creditor is really the best way to balance. And I think people need to know that all you need to do is reach out. In most
Hmm.
cases, um, the folks for the creditor are more than happy to hear from you, and
Mm-hmm.
no harm in finding out your options. I think folks, and I'm including myself in this, is we stick our head in the sand and we
Yep.
think it just we go on to the next thing that we're interested in doing, and we avoid the things that are unpleasant. But this is one of those things that doesn't go away, and you can avoid a lot of the unpleasantries by just really picking up the phone and having that conversation. So you raise a good point, and I think that today's debt collection industry is not your grandfather's debt
Mm-hmm.
collection. uh, Empathy, civility, education, transparency are all baked in, both for many different reasons. A lot of it's regulation, but also it's
Mm-hmm.
reputational risk.
Mm-hmm.
No creditor wants to be seen as anything other than being reasonable. So
Right.
we'll need to take advantage of that. So, what steps do you think could be taken to remove barriers, prevent that those barriers that prevent these conversations? Things that get in the way of the parties actually talking to each other.
Um, I think, more education on both sides, more education on the consumer side, more education on the creditor side. Um, Again, I think we kind of get into this trap where, especially with my medical debt work, people just assume that people don't want to pay their bills. I hear that a lot, even with medical debt, and I don't think that's true. And I think it's the same thing is true with consumer debt, is that I think people do want to pay their bills. It's just, again, they get in over their head, they don't know what to do, so they put it off, or maybe they lost their job and they just can't get ahead. So I mean, like education, I think education would really help on both sides of the creditor and the consumer end, because that way we can keep those lines of communication open. And with the creditor end, you can say, hey, you can work with us. And with the consumer end, it's just like asking more information. And it's like getting more information about like what they owe and that kind of thing. So I think that's really important, just to make sure that both parties are in communication with each other, and more
Yeah,
education.
yeah, and I would love, and I know this is something that we talked about at the summit, where it would be amazing if it was part of high school curriculum,
Mm-hmm.
where just to understand the difference between a civil case and a criminal case, the difference between, um, you know, a small claim case and a jury trial. I mean, not everything is like,
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
everything is law and order.
Right.
So, these types of cases are much more like the people's court, like Judge Wapner or Judge Judy or things like that, where it's,
Right.
and it's not nearly as scary as, a jury trial or anything like that. And quite frankly, um, I'm always amazed when I would engage with consumers when I was doing the litigation work, educated people that had jobs that just did not understand just the regular process, the court process of what was going on. What were these papers? Why were they here? Are they getting
Right.
arrested? I mean, those
Right.
questions, am I going to get arrested, are still something that is, I'm not saying it's every consumer, but it's still a concern because when they see something that says a court notice on it, and so
Yeah,
I
for
think there's
sure.
some work there of just basic people understanding, the three branches of government. I know it sounds
Right.
like basic kind of things, how Bill, you know, I'm sure you remember that cartoon, the Bill sitting on the steps of
Schoolhouse Rock, yeah.
there you go. So the more things change, the more things stay the same. People
Yeah.
still don't know, um, how's this happening? What's going on here? Because thankfully we live in a country in a general sense that is, uh, it's a democracy. We're not
Right.
worried about like, the military is going to come rolling down the street, or most people aren't worried about that. So
Yes.
you know what I mean. We
Yeah.
kind of we ignore it. I think sometimes that when I meet people from other countries that don't have the freedoms that we have
Hmm.
in the U.S., they are more engaged. They know a lot more about government and processing
Right.
because they have to, because they're worried.
Right.
Here we kind of, regardless of who's in which party's in power, things change a little bit, but like 2 or 3% one way or the other. But thankfully the core stays steady. But I agree. Education would be fantastic, and also court notices could be written clearer.
Yep.
There's no uniformity, and again, those are kinds of things that both sides of the aisle and the industry and the
Hmm.
judiciary need to be involved in. I mean, it really is, uh, you know, and I've told this to many folks, especially in the court system, putting a notice in bolder type, making it larger does
Yeah.
not make it more understandable. Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
that is not going to get a consumer to say, oh, it's like when you meet someone and you don't speak their language and you think if you just
Yeah.
talk louder, they'll understand you. No, doesn't help.
Right. Well, we did that exercise
Yeah, let's
in
let's
the
talk about that. Let's talk about
yeah,
that.
so we did the exercise. We all had an envelope opening up these court summons. Like we had a scenario like we're this person, this is our situation. We make $35,000 a year. We're not eligible for any benefits. So you get this court summons. And, even someone with an I mean, like I'm supposed to be this person, but like even thinking to like as myself with a doctorate, I have a doctorate. Like I'm not a lawyer. So I'm just kind of like, well, this can get pretty overwhelming. So you have to take it like in chunks just to be like, okay, do I understand this? Do I understand this? I don't recognize this creditor here. And then when you get into the fact that sometimes your debt is sold to another party, so you're not gonna like know exactly. But luckily, in my case, I think our state does require like the original creditor because the original creditor was on there, and I think it was Target or something. And so you're reading this in chunks and kind of getting the grasp of everything. But I could see like a person who you like maybe busy, maybe working a couple jobs, just look at this and be like, I'm not going to deal with this because I have no idea what this is, and it's very confusing to me. So that was a really eye-opening experience doing that exercise when you get a summons about a debt that's being collected and having to go to court.
Yeah, no, 100%. And again, people that are in this space, or if you're an attorney, you see these documents routinely. They're not very imposing. They're not scary because you've
Right.
seen thousands of them. But if it's your first time, that you've never been, no loss, you've not been involved with any lawsuits or lawyers or courts, it is, a little bit scary,
Hmm.
uh, you know, and people don't understand the options. In other words, whatever the amount is, they think like, oh my gosh, where am I going to get that money from? I don't have all that, but they don't need
Hmm.
all that. They would just call.
Right.
They'd be more than happy to work with a payment arrangement, and the lawsuit would stop moving down the tracks. But people don't understand many times what they should do,
Right.
and so that's really, I think, where regardless of what side of the aisle you're on. I think education, I think everybody would agree, is is to everyone's benefit, and even the court's benefit. I mean, it saves money. People understand the process. They're not overwhelming the court with phone calls and letters, and it's like anything. If the process is streamlined and clear and transparent, it makes it more efficient. So,
For sure.
very good point. Okay, so we're getting close to the end of our cup of coffee, so to speak. So how do you see your role as a state legislator, especially in a state that's, some would say, a little bit divided sometimes, fostering collaboration between the consumer advocacy and side of this and the creditor business communities to
Hmm.
create like a fair and transparent and effective debt resolution process?
So I've kind of done a little bit of this in my work around medical debt reforms. Certainly there's some sides where we're just not going to agree at all, but then, we're working with like sometimes the bankers and the credit unions to kind of come up with a compromise around definitions or language. So, it's always helpful to be able to work with some of those partners there and negotiate where you can. I mean, there's sometimes it's hard on certain ends, but like there's some compromises that we can make. Again, we were working on the definition of medical debt, and the Bankers League and the Credit Union League were just wanted to make sure that credit cards were exempt. And although we know that a lot of medical debt is on credit cards, it's a fair compromise because once that medical debt goes on a credit card, it becomes credit card debt. And, also home equity lines of credit, like people aren't using it to pay off medical debt. So, those were compromises we could make. So it's important to talk to partners and talk to people. My bill is bipartisan. I do have a Republican joint sponsor. And so we've
Why
been
don't you
working.
tell our listeners what the bill's
Yes.
about?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. So I have a bill around a couple of medical debt reforms. So it would ban wage garnishments, and it would cap interest rates at 3%. Um,
But just on medical debt.
just on medical debt, correct. So I do have, like I said, I have a Republican joint sponsor. So it is a bipartisan bill. We've gotten a lot of bipartisan support around it. There's been recent polling around several provisions around medical debt that polling says that there is bipartisan support for specifically state legislatures to do something about it. So yeah, again, we've worked with our partners to negotiate on certain things, and it's always been helpful to keep that line of communication open.
Yeah, and I think that it's really, to me, it's really encouraging when a legislator like yourself understands the nuance of the definition. Like, because most of the folks in my industry, really the concern was how are you defining medical debt
Mm-hmm.
within financial services products? It wasn't the medical debt wasn't necessarily the problem. It was that
Right.
they don't want a situation where someone goes into a pharmacy, Walgreens, and buys a bottle of Tylenol on their credit card, and now the entire credit card bill is considered medical debt, and now the lender is out is dealing with that nuance. So, but again, you listened,
Mm-hmm.
you made the compromise, or it could be that you didn't even think of it initially that would
Exactly. Yep.
right, and that's why organizations like the National Creditors Bar um, want to be, seen as someone legislators could call and say, you know, even if you think we're not going to agree, you could get a lot of information even from the folks you don't agree with. So,
Yeah, for sure.
so finding out like, hey, what would be your stance on this, and where would the problem be? You could avoid a lot of that like the sky is falling reaction that people get when
Mm-hmm.
you have these conversations. So really, that was one of the main purposes of this summit was to get legislators to understand that, look, you might think, and this is on both sides. You might think, but I've learned many times that I don't. That
Right.
I know what the my adversary or opposition feels about an issue, and then we have a conversation, and the differences are so minute. If had we just talked about it initially, probably could have avoided disagreements. So anyway,
Yep.
we're getting
Absolutely.
close to the end here. Final thoughts before we sign off.
It's just that, I really learned a lot from the summit. It was great to meet you and other folks from the industry, and again, hopefully we can work together and figure out how to make things better between the creditor and the consumer side, and just make things a little bit uh fairer and more transparent, because it is better for both parties to be able to communicate and work together.
Sounds great. And NCBA, we have quite a few members in Ohio, and I'm hoping that going forward, we can work together on these types of things. If there's any issues, people can reach out to you, I'm sure, and to your office. So thank you so much for coming on NCBA's coffee break today. Um, that's it for our episode. So to our listeners, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, stay engaged, stay curious, and stay caffeinated. Have a good day, everyone. And thank you again for joining us.